Hi team. So I have the pleasure to be joined with one of my coaching staff here in Amy. Amy's absolutely superb coach in the nature that she does, not just pushing people with their fitness agendas, but also in terms of a well-being and mindfulness perspective as well. So Amy, just want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to those who may not know you, and to leave a little bit of time to describe kind of like what your role is within JG Physique, and what are some of the things that you've kind of learned from the job title as well.
So I'm Amy. I've been a coach with JG Physique now for 2 years. I think it's just touching 2 years. Obviously, when I came on, I was the only female coach to come on
Mm.
board. Still am, by the way, the only female coach. And yeah, I obviously came on board, obviously with the aim to help other women to achieve their fitness goals. And as I came into the role of that, it definitely became a lot more than that of just helping females. It's more of understanding females and getting into more depth with people and how not every one person is the same. So yeah, it's been educating for me as a coach as well as for all my clients, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, so before we touch more on actually like what your role entails, and discussing kind of the things that you put in play in terms of your own philosophy to help push, like you say, people in the right direction and to improve their own health, let's touch on that subject about being a female coach, because there is this kind of like stigma or stereotype that the fitness industry is a male industry. I'll put in quotations. So what challenges do you feel that being a female lies within the industry, if there are any challenges at all, and what things have you learnt in terms of like your own career development or your own personal skill development throughout this journey?
But the main thing that comes to my mind when working with females as a
Mm.
female client is the life is very much different to a man's life. Obviously, yes, men and women both have children, but it predominantly falls a lot on the woman to not give up on themselves and their original lives pre-kids. But I would say 9 out of 10 clients, like from female to male, have struggled and have lost themselves a lot more after having kids and neglected themselves and their health and not made themselves a priority. Whereas my male clients who have children have never kind of felt that way as much as
Mm.
my female clients. So I would say that's like been the biggest push for me is just trying to remind women that pre or post children they are important and they need to prioritize themselves because if they don't work on themselves and do stuff for themselves, they can't give the best version of them to anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. I think we obviously you mentioned pre and postnatal, in a sense of I think it's actually quite a blossoming area or field in the fitness industry where more and more women are signing up to these things because they're starting to recognise and understand the importance of these things. Because, like you
Yeah.
say, women tentatively are the more caring gender in the couple in terms of like the stereotype in a sense. But in terms of the idea of the support that women need kind of postnatal, what they're realizing now is that actually creating a social environment where you're working on your development and your own health by creating a social environment for your child where actually you have two healthy parents who are both looking after themselves and both giving themselves and representing themselves in the best and healthiest way, that actually also does reflect on the development of the child as well. So I think that's the beauty in what we're finding in those sorts of areas as well. Looking into the specifics of you though, as a female coach, have you found yourself in any sense of anything challenging at all, in any stretch of the imagination?
I mean, just as being a female coach, not necessarily. I don't think that
Yeah,
makes a difference whether I'm male or female. I think
yeah,
it's very much client dependent, not just because
yeah.
I'm a female coach as such. I think there's no typical challenges with being a female coach. But I do feel like I can, it's not a challenge, but what I do feel like I can do is have that warming, gentle, and understanding approach more with clients, maybe than a male client could,
Yeah,
if that makes
yeah,
um, in terms of like challenges, it's not challenging the coach side, it's more of like the client side of things. Like
Yeah.
everyone's very much different. Everyone needs different coaching styles.
Hmm.
Everyone has different backgrounds, and that's the challenge more than
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, I think you make an interesting point there, because the reason that I ask it, and it's particularly coming from my sense of my background as well. My education platform started off with elite athletes in sports, and one of the focal points of conversations was the idea of female influence in that kind of democratic or style of coaching. Obviously, when you're working with kind of like general public, a lot of people have come here because they have a comprehension and an ideology of how they want to change their lives, but perhaps don't have the motivation, drive, knowledge to go away and do that themselves. And that's why a lot of the time they will come to coaches like ourselves. But having spoken to female coaches within the elite sporting background, because that's a little bit more laissez-faire, a lot more of the players, athletes have a
Yeah.
lot more understanding of these different things. A lot of the time that actually can rub off on the actual authority that women find very difficult to grasp when it comes to teaching those people. So it's good that obviously there is that differentiation
Yeah.
between maybe your experience in comparison to the other side of the field, where it's maybe more of a prominent problem that maybe needs to be looked at, or to be discussed a little bit more, really, because I don't think it is addressed enough. But moving away from your individual experience with coaching, talking about your role specifically now. So obviously you mentioned that one of the skills that you've had to develop is actually being diverse in the nature of your approach, depending on the type of client that you're addressing and talking to. Okay, so talk about some of the challenges, maybe not in specific detailed example, but ideas of things that you've had to change about your own style and the way that you deliver things based off your experience working with us thus far.
Yeah. So as I mentioned previously, like not every one client is the same, and everyone has different needs, and people need to be approached differently with the coaching style. So, we have a whole array of different clients. So some people might want a bit more of a chill, relaxed kind of approach, and then the others might want a bit more of a scream and shout kind
Yeah.
of like tell me what to do every second of the day sort of like approach to it. And a bit more of like a corporal effect on it, as they need, in order for them to do something, they need you to tell them to do it.
Yeah.
They don't do it off their own backs. Whereas, you have the other side that are very much, not as like hand it to them on a plate and they go and do it, but like they know what they have to do. They just need a little bit of a nudge from you to
Yeah.
go and do it, if that makes sense. So there's very much different styles in that way, but then there's also, it's different in people have dealt with a lot of stuff in their life, and a lot of trauma, and or whether it could be eating disorders or injuries, and so you have to adapt your coaching to that individual,
Yeah.
uh,
Exactly.
and give them the service that they deserve and the service that they need and want for them to get the most out of being with us on this program.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that me and James spoke about in a previous podcast. Is one of the things that we actually strive ourselves on is the actual accountability element to things. Because, like you say, you will work with different people and people will respond to it in different ways. So, kind of leading on to what we mentioned in terms of the differentiation between the stereotypical style of generic public to how you would go with the elite athlete. Some people, even within the general public, do prefer a little bit more of a flexi approach. What we have to remember is fitness isn't, if we think of things of a hierarchy of priority, people are going to put their families, their occupation, and their friends in and at the top of that pedestal. And health and fitness isn't going to be at the top of that pedestal, but it's our idea to make sure that they are continuously thinking about that, because the more and more you can push that up in terms of the hierarchy and being accountable to what you want to do, one, you're going to achieve what you want to strive towards, which is going to motivate you. But like, again, if you're representing yourself in the best and healthiest possible way, it's also going to benefit you in other senses of your life. And it's going to reflect on other people around you as well.
Exactly.
So I think that is a big thing that we obviously discussed here. In terms of the way that we coach, though, obviously, I'm sure that you've had personal training background as well. But definitely in terms of the transition for myself, moving from personal training to this kind of industry, personal training is the perception that obviously you turn up on that day, you have that session on that day, and then that's it. As soon as you go home, the rest of it's kind of left to yourself. It's kind of like it becomes a lot more of a independent journey Whereas a lot of people do work more in a cohesive dynamic, particularly if they've got like kind of like sporting backgrounds or club backgrounds, or are common to doing activities with friends and different things like that. So one thing that I've found particularly is that accountability element, but also obviously the calls and the report building that you build with these people, is the idea that it actually becomes more of a cohesive unit where they're not just feel like they're on this journey by themselves, but they're there with their respective coach, and they're there with the surrounding clients around them that are there to support them and to push them in any way, sense, or form. Okay. So, in terms of your own reflection of the transition, how have you found the transition between that type of training, type of coaching in comparison to when you was working in a gym environment?
What I would is it's similar in some aspects, but it's entirely different in
Yeah.
in a way of like actually properly helping someone. So going from showing up for clients in person and them also feel like they have to show up for you in person, going from like that approach to then completely being remote, not having to be somewhere at a time and a place physically, is very much different. But what I feel from what I've gained from doing it online compared to the one-to-one side of it is you can literally be there for someone a lot more,
Mm.
and not like in a way of when you're one-to-one, clients will go into a lot more detail with you when you're face to face, and they'll tell you all about their day and their relationship problems, and you become a therapist more, as well as a
Yeah.
PT, like you really do. But I feel like that can also be a bit of a distraction for people during those sessions.
Mm.
Whereas moving on to online, like they are tunnel vision, they're not having someone to talk to in between their sets. They're just on their own. They're getting done what needs to be done. But then also when they get back from that session, when they're online, they still have me to speak to. Like, this went well in the session. This didn't really work, or, whatever the example is there. You still have that 24-hour support and contact. You also have, a bit of an extra nudge if you don't get that session done at that time. I'm messaging them saying, why is that box empty? Like, why haven't you trained
Yeah.
yet? And they can say, oh, life's got in the way today, been super busy. It's like, okay, right, well, let's book that in for tomorrow instead. And it's not as much of a having to show up at a time and a place. It's more like, okay, we need to meet the expectation, but not the schedule. Whereas if you're one-to-one, you have to meet the schedule as well as the expectation. And I feel like that just gives people a lot more flexibility with what they're, with their life, and just not having to feel like they have to juggle everything. But yeah, I feel like when you're online, going from online to PT, you just help people in a bigger way than just that one session, an hour, like that 1 hour session. And then you have no pretty much contact after that. There's not that support, there's not that guidance, there's not that accountability with everything going on in your life. Whereas with online coaching, there is. Like, we help with every aspect of your life and every aspect of your day. We're there for you to come in and, we had a plan A, but, things have got in the way. So we've structured and built that plan B for you. So that's where the difference is with online to PT. Like, PT, you show up for an hour, then, have a great day. I'll see you next week, Wednesday. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Whereas when you're online, like, you have that constant support, motivation, accountability, 24/7.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what I tentatively find as well is that, because obviously, like you say, there's that 24-hour support network. When I was working in a gym, and it kind of relates to what you mentioned there, is in terms of the presence of, you have to turn up and it has to be off your incentive to go into that session and to continue to train. When we look into relation of the theory of behavioral change that has been within science for years and hasn't, obviously it's had its small changes, but for the most part it's relatively the same even to this day, is that a lot of people will view what their goals are based on an external source, whether that be an external trauma, for example, or it could be self-reflection or anything like that, and that's mainly what creates this kind of like comprehension of beginning, right? Then they have this objective, that in a sense is either achievable, okay, or is unachievable, okay. Both can have their pros and cons in terms of a sense of, if you set yourself a goal which is unachievable, yes, okay, you're striving yourself to push to something which is great, but if you don't have the sense of direction and the framework to actually get there in a time that is reasonable to you, you put yourself in a position where you can demotivate yourself because you're not actually going away and achieving what you set out to do. In the same sense as well with goals and objectives, yes, okay, short-term goals are really, really good, because it keeps you in check. You know exactly what you need to do to get to where you set yourself up to. But then sometimes people struggle with, okay, what's next? And we
Yeah.
always find that kind of like that first day that you start to the third month that you go in is normally the period at some stage where majority of people drop off. Um, in terms of like the actual behavior model, this is what we call kind of like the action phase where people have gone away and done it. And people often don't reach that maintenance phase where they kind of go to the 3 to 9 months, which actually really does create that habit. So tentatively, what I've found with online clients is there's such a larger retention rate of people who are able to take that extra step into that maintenance phase. And that's because, like you say, because you've got that 24-hour support, you kept accountable to what you need to do on what that day to day is. You kind of know what you need to be doing in the short term, which is ultimately going to be leading up to the long term. And then you get created that vision where it's going, okay, it's not a sense of, okay, we've got a pull session today. This is what we're going to do. Is blah, 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 blah. Let's get the session done and it's done. It's a sense of, okay, here's your training program. This is how we're going to work on it to begin with. This is how we're going to progress things forward. This is my expectation on how we're going to grow week on week on week. And then once we've completed this training program, we're going to move on to this. This coincides with that. And then you get a lot more kind of like deliberation and introduction to actual how periodization works. Obviously, we see periodization a lot in elite sport, where training is frameworked and formulated to an overall objective, whether that be for the whole season in sports, whether that be just generally for the general overall fitness development throughout the year. So having a short-term goal, which always adds up and coincides as well to a long-term goal, is really important, and I feel like you really do get that from this online industry as well. So
100%. Whereas I don't feel like that's typically explained in personal training. It's not like, I think you could ask probably 80% of people who have a personal trainer and they'd be like, periodization, what's that? Because they've never been explained that from the coach or from the trainer. Whereas we do go into that with detail. We explain why we've done X, Y, and Z within the program, and you know, you help them to understand why they're doing what they're doing at the end of the day.
yeah,
Whereas I don't feel like that's predominantly done with one-to-one training sessions.
yeah, exactly. The next thing I want to talk about is sustainability and achievability. As you know, these are two of the things that are the most important. One of the things that we always address to people, because like I said, people will come in with a comprehension. They'll have an external goal and a target they want to achieve, and they'll either set themselves which is achievable, or they won't set themselves something that is achievable. And ultimately, like I said, they can coincide and have their pros and cons against one another. Okay, so in terms of like your experience and how you've coached, how do you kind of deliver that approach to someone who comes on and goes, right, I want to achieve this, and you're kind of reflecting on it and you're going, okay, you can achieve that, but the time scaling that you've probably given yourself isn't respectable to what you potentially can do. How do you go about talking someone and educating someone into going, okay, yes, this goal is objective, but maybe we need to revise a little bit more about what the actual expectation of time it's going to take to get that done?
Yeah. Yeah. So with an example like that, what I do is I just get very realistic with them, and I do like kind of get not like straight up and be like, okay, I don't think you can achieve that. Like I'm not, I don't take that approach to it. I'm just like, okay, that can be achievable, but in this time frame. You know, that's when we really go in with the SMART goals and be like, okay, is it achievable? Is it time bound? You know, is it measurable? Can we go through all of that? And once you go through the SMART goals with them, they're like, yeah, okay, that probably is a little bit
Yeah,
of a high expectation. And what I do in those cases is, yes, that can be a long-term goal, not your goal in 3 months to lose 25 kg. Like
yeah,
you know, you'll have to go to extreme measures to get that done. Whereas I will then also put in place, like, we want this to be sustainable for you. We want you to be able to do what you're doing throughout the program for the rest of your life if you need that. Do you know what I mean? Like, in terms of the habits that we build, the structure that we put in place, like, it all wants to seem doable in life and not a chore. And if you
yeah,
have such a big goal that's pretty unrealistic to reach in 3 months' time, you're going to be, you know, overworking, overtrained, probably, you know, under eating massively, putting more stress on your central nervous system, on the body. So you're going to hit a point of flat out plateau. And you just need to go into more detail with them, explaining why it's not good for them to have such a big expectation when they just get disappointed by not reaching that goal. So it's just more about
yeah,
having a realistic approach and breaking that big goal down into smaller goals and being like, you need to celebrate every win, not just when you get to that point, and only felt you'll be
Yeah.
happy once you get to X number on the scale.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the approach that I take with clients
Yeah.
who have big expectations.
So I'm gonna bring up the next point as well, which I'm sure kind of makes you bite your tongue a little bit, and it certainly does in terms of my experience when I've spoken to these people. But 90% of the people that we tend to bring on are those who have tried what we call surface level solutions, right? Diets that they find online, people that have found these incredible results within such a short period of time, lost so much weight, and then they find themselves a month, 2 months down the line where they actually go, actually, this isn't sustainable to me. They go back to normal routines and habits. They find themselves back to square one. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to someone who is on the fence about using these surface level solutions as opposed to actually creating a formulated structure and plan which gives them the results they see, but maybe at a longer rate, but as a much more sustainable method?
Yeah. So with things like that, I'm not fully for or against them. I think they can be a good little kickstart into maybe potentially starting your fitness journey or starting to eat better. That's all I see it as. It's not a forever thing. Like these, let's say, for example, a 6 week shred, a challenge that you can do in a whole harangue group of people. It's 6 weeks for a reason because it's not maintainable and sustainable. Keto, it's not sustainable forever. You can't not eat a carbohydrate for the rest of your life
Yeah.
unless you physically couldn't because of health reasons, which so it's just honestly again just being more realistic with people and be like, okay, can you see yourself, for example, of intermittent fasting, can you see yourself not eating breakfast for the rest of your life? If the answer is no, don't do it. Because that's what, at the end of the day, you want is to create and form structure, habits, routines that you can do without thinking about them. Like they just fit into your life. And I feel like once you remove something from that, it just creates a whole lot of imbalance within what you're doing.
Yeah. No, I think you make some really good points. Just to touch up and to finalise then on the podcast for today. Imagine I'm someone who has no knowledge about the fitness industry. I've looked at myself, I've self-reflected, and I've gone, I want to make a change, right? What are the three biggest tips that you would give to someone like myself to get going and to really think about as I go through this journey of change?
What I would think about is, what do you want to gain from it? So what is going to be your why? Why do you want to do it? Why are you going to take up such, not like a big priority of your life, but like, why do you now want to focus on yourself? What do you want to gain from doing this? Like your why is the most important thing as to why you would do something like this. And you need to resonate with it throughout the entire process. That would be my number one. Number two would be, oh gosh, now you made me think. It would be to take baby steps. Not trying to complete and change every aspect of your life all at once. It's, doing that 1% each day, and that 1% better each day over time makes such a huge difference. Not thinking that you need to, walk 10,000 steps, train 5 times a week, drink 4 liters of water, do everything and get everything perfect all at once. It's literally just chipping away day by day, doing things small over time makes a huge difference. They would be my two main ones, I think. Do you want to throw anything in there?
Yeah, probably the last one for me is sacrifice. So,
Well, yeah,
what in your
good.
routine have you found has built you up to the point of where you're at now, and you reflect and go, okay, this may have happened because of this, whether it be alcohol consumption, overindulging in food, sweet tooth, bad eating habits, low motivation to train, whatever it is that you've found that are the combining factors as to why you are where you are right now. What do you now need to change, or what do you need to sacrifice now to get you in the right direction? Because it's all well doing one thing and then the other, but then if you're not willing to chop and change the next part, then all you're doing is regressing what all the hard work you're doing elsewhere. So it's understanding, like you say, why you do it. How are you going to create a structure to do that which is effective and achievable? And what are you going to have to sacrifice to make sure that you get what you need to get done? If you're able to get all three of those things done, everything else will work like clockwork. You'll have different things that you'll have to learn along the way, but you get those three main things done, you should be okay. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I second that. And then also with that is, don't expect change if you're not willing to make a change.
Yeah, exactly. So I could imagine you've had countless examples of people who, you sat there on call and you go to explain the data and it's like, I haven't seen a change in etc etc, and sometimes there are that degree of example where people's weight will stay the same, and if they've worked hard, but that's kind of the beauty of the job as well, right? Is being able to actually sit down with someone and go, actually, do you mind if I give you some honest feedback here? The reason you've not seen change is because you've not worked hard enough here, or you've not applied yourself enough here, or you need to change here to see the next result. So until you're going to do that, we're not going to see the rate of change of result, maybe perhaps that you want to see. So I think also as well, like you mentioned in terms of that rapport and relationship building, I think you can be a little bit more open and honest with people, as opposed to maybe in the gym where you kind of got to be open and honest, but at the same time you're kind of restricted in the time you have with them, as well as getting the session done as well. So it's kind of like hard for them to take on information and honesty, whilst also doing their training sessions as well. Okay. But that should touch up the rest of the podcast. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to jump on with us, Amy. And again, if any of you guys do have any questions for either of us, please do drop them in the comments. Again, also if you do have any other topics maybe that you want us to address specifically, we'd be more than happy to take on board those. But again, thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.